Hey, how you doing? I'm Joe Dallas. Welcome. I want to talk to you about 5 cancel culture trends to watch for as we're starting the year 2023. The general theme, I believe, of all of these trends will be persuasion when possible, power when prudent. Persuasion when possible. If we can persuade you, if we can re educate you, if we can get you to revise your basic ideas about marriage, family, sex, racial justice, social justice, if we can persuade you, so much the better. We'll try to do that through the media. We'll try to do that through the psychiatric industry. We'll certainly try to do it in the education system. If we can persuade you, we can. If we can't persuade you, oh, well, then it's prudent to use power. We'll penalize you. So be persuaded or be penalized. That's the heart and the soul of cancel culture. It's a crusade hoping for a revolution. I don't make any bones about that. You shouldn't either. It's a crusade and it's hoping for a revolution. Well, how do revolutions happen? Not too quickly, not too quickly and not too abruptly. You have a chipping away, gathering of forces. You get footholds. You make incremental moves here, there, and then you finally move in full force. Because what works incrementally will work eventually. People committed to crusades know that. So, with that in mind, let's look at 5 cancel culture crusade related items and trends to watch for in the coming year. Let's start with the 5th. Christian University speech codes. Watch for that. I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that. Christian University speech codes. Notice I'm not saying a complete overhaul of the teaching at Christian universities. I think what we'll see more of, though, is the adaptation of speech codes by Christian universities to help appease the woke movement, because the movement is, of course, ultimately wanting to try to revise the position of Christian universities, especially on marriage and gender identity and sexuality. Well, that's a hard sell. It'd be pretty hard to get universities to do that. But one good way to get towards that goal is to at least change the speech in universities. Now, last year, 2021, um, I should say that's almost 2 years ago now, but 33 students from different Christian universities filed a lawsuit against the Department of Education. And they were claiming that the Department of Education, as a federal agency, was not protecting them from discrimination. And they cited Title IX. Title IX is federal law, goes back to 1972, and it prohibits universities from practicing discrimination based on sex. Now, that has been interpreted in the years since then as including sexual orientation, as in lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So, Title IX pretty much prohibits you not allowing students to live out their sexuality in whatever way they choose, be it gay or trans or bi or what have you. But Title IX includes a religious exemption. Now, students from Christian universities who identify themselves as gay or lesbian or trans are saying, well, that religious exemption is allowing schools to discriminate against us. So, accordingly, Christian universities can, quote unquote, discriminate and still receive federal funding for student loans. So now what these students have been saying is, hey, we want to challenge that. We want a revision of that. We want a Supreme Court ruling that is going to overturn that religious exemption. And as I said, that's going to be a pretty hard sell, because even more moderate Christian universities are not going to be comfortable with the idea of saying we're going to revise all our housing policies and all our behavior policies. But I tell you what, if it'll keep you at bay, if it'll appease you for a while, we'll change our words. We won't say homosexual. We'll say LGBTQ, or sexual minority, or gay and lesbian. We won't say transsexual, we'll say transgender or non-binary, and so forth and so on. So watch for the trend of even solid Christian universities starting to cave a little on the issue of language to hopefully stave off any more direct legal action. Now, if you change what people consider to be offensive labels, this is where it gets tricky. You can also change eventually their so-called offensive positions. So watch for this trend. It's going to be one incremental move towards changing the way universities are addressing these issues. As one retired sociology professor said, quote, denominations won't budge, so colleges will need to lead the way. Yeah, that's a trend to watch for. Another is fourth, watch for an upswing in political guerrilla warfare. Upswing in political guerrilla warfare. We saw the worst of it in especially 2020 and 2021, didn't we? Especially with the ascension of groups like um, Antifa and the more violent elements of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, we're coming up on an election year, okay? Just to look at it rather starkly, the political left has certainly had a lot of favor with the current administration, but now they're going to see a threat to that favor. We're going to be starting the primaries. We're going to be starting to see presidential nominees making their statements and throwing their hats in the ring. And that's going to mean, well, we got to put a lot of pressure on the American public to see that there will be hell to pay if you put a political conservative in office. There will be rioting. There will be violence. There will be intimidation. And so back in 2021, especially, when in response to the George Floyd tragedy, we saw whole cities being taken over. That was really a test. You know, they were testing the waters. Corey ten Boom said something interesting about Holland when the Nazis overrode that country during the Holocaust and they were starting to commit acts of violence against Jews. She said, quote, "It's as though they were testing us, trying the temper of the country. How many Dutchmen would go along with them? And the answer to our shame was many." Yeah, man, back in 2021, it's as though they were testing us, trying the temper of the country. How many Americans would go along with them when they took over cities, when they burned down police stations, when they called for violence against police officers, when they called for violence against anybody who they claimed to be racist or homophobic or sexist or too conservative in any way? They were trying the temper of the country. How many Americans went along with them? Well, the answer to our shame, many. So watch for guerrilla warfare, particularly in social political movements. And I think you'll be seeing more of that as we approach, especially the end of 2023 and get closer to an election year. Number 3 on the list, critical race theory at the movies. That'll be an interesting trend, but watch for it. I'll bet it's going to happen. I haven't seen yet any film that directly addressed critical race theory as such, but cinema has always played a significant role in any kind of social change, for good or for evil, sometimes for much good. To Kill a Mockingbird back in 1962, that certainly influenced the culture regarding racism. Good. The Diary of Anne Frank was one of the first eye openers to many people after the Holocaust about what it was like to firsthand witness what was done to Jewish people in hiding. That was good. I remember a TV movie made back in 1984, The Burning Bed, based on a well known case of a woman who finally killed her husband in what was deemed to be self defense after just years of routine violence committed against her. And that certainly opened up a national conversation on whether or not we are offering battered spouses enough protection. The film Philadelphia, starring Tom Hanks, that generated a lot of social change in changing people's attitudes, both towards homosexual people and towards AIDS patients. So, as I said, cinema is a powerful tool in the hands of anybody who wants to affect social change. So I would say this, look for maybe a Netflix series or a made for TV movie or even a major motion picture that kind of puts a face and a story to critical race theory, because I think that's going to make it more palatable to people. Right now, critical race theory has taken a strong hold in corporations, certainly in the education system, but doesn't have the cultural basic backing that I believe it will have if stories get told, because stories are powerful. And for better or worse, I got to tell you, whoever's telling the best stories, they're going to win the culture wars and the cultural debates. Number 2 on the list, ghosting the haters. Ghost those haters. When you ghost people, you basically cut them off. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to have anything to do with you. I won't have any association because I have decided you are a hater or you are known as a hater. What's a hater? Somebody who hates people? No. No, these days a hater is anybody who holds the wrong position, even if it happens to be the right position. If you believe in the biblical definition of marriage and family, you hold the right definition, but that is seen as the definition of a hater in the year 2023 and beyond. So, there was a time, intolerance was something to be conquered. I remember in the 70s, especially, there was a call for more tolerance. Oh, we hate intolerance. Intolerance is a terrible thing. Down with intolerance. Now, instead of intolerance being something to be conquered, it's something to be celebrated. There is a virtue in being intolerant of people who hold the wrong viewpoints. So, Trend in 2023, look for more family splits. Look for more Christian parents being just shattered when their son or daughter says to them, Mom, Dad, you're racist, you're homophobic, you're sexist, you're transphobic, you're whatever. I will no longer have an association with you. Look for more of that happening. Look for more social splits. Look for more people ending friendships. Look for more professional shunning over people who hold the wrong viewpoint. And finally, I believe one of the most significant and, by the way, one of the most seriously destructive trends that we can look for in the year 2023 is not just the reclassification of pedophilia to being something less than blatantly evil, but also the classifying of people who are anti-pedophile as people who are the ones with the problem. Unthinkable, you think? Well, talk to your parents. Back in the 60s and early 70s, it was unthinkable to think that we as a culture would reclassify homosexuality as being something normal. And it was unthinkable in those days to think that we would classify people who objected to homosexuality as being the ones who have a problem. But now homosexuality is seen as normal, and those who object to it are seen as having a condition known as homophobia. Now, watch for the beginning of that kind of labeling being applied to people who object to pedophilia. Um, you remember this year, this past year, actually 2022, still got to get used to that. Balenciaga uh, promoted an ad campaign that featured little children. I mean, we're talking toddlers, little kids, holding teddy bears that were dressed in S&M bondage kind of gear. Well, there was a public outrage over that, and the company wound up apologizing, even pretended they didn't really know who had done that they're firing whoever was responsible for that ad campaign, which was, I think, a bunch of baloney. But here's the point. They never would have done that if they did not have reason to believe that that would be socially acceptable. Those are the times we're in. Look, back in 1996, I wrote a book called The Gay Gospel, and in it, I pointed out that there was even then a move to legitimize pedophilia, and that movement would follow the playbook of the gay rights movement, and that it would get backing from the psychiatric professionals and then from the news media and the entertainment industry and the school system, and it would eventually legitimize what the public broadly condemned. Back then, I quoted Dr. John Money, who was at the time a very respected leader with Johns Hopkins University, and Dr. Money said on record, quote, "If I were to see a case of a boy aged 10 or 11 who's intensely erotically attracted toward a man in his 20s or 30s, if the relationship is mutual, I would not call it pathological in any way." That was back in 1996. Now, he wasn't alone. He was joined in those beliefs by, for example, Dr. William Pomeroy of the Alfred Kinsey Research Team, Dr. Derek Calderwood, the chairman of the Sex Information and Education Council in the U.S., Dr. John DiCecco, head of sexuality at San Francisco State University, and Douglas Powell, a psychologist with Harvard Health Services, all of whom said that they believed that a sexual relationship between an adult and a child was not necessarily damaging and could even be, one of them said, quote unquote, character building. Now, look, these were not a bunch of dirty old men in trench coats. These were professionals, medical doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, academics, who back then, nearly 30 years ago, were saying, hey, we believe that pedophilia should be reconsidered as something that could be normal. Children are sexual, therefore children must be sexually free, even if it means engaging with adults. So what have we been doing over the last few decades? Sexualizing kids like crazy. We provide them with contraceptives at school. We talk to them about blatant sexual issues at school. We encourage them to transition from one gender identity to another in school. And in the media, they are explicitly sexualized. Now, I know we're not to the point where the country or the world at large is legitimizing pedophilia. But here's the way it works. Start with normalizing, end with demonizing. Normalize the behavior itself, then demonize anybody who objects to the behavior. Now, I remember, just for example, back when many of us were objecting to pro-gay education material in the public school system, way back in the 1980s, we were objecting to that. And we were saying, hey, you are showing sexually explicit materials to kids. This is not education. This is indoctrination, and this is obscene, and this is an abuse of children. etc., etc. And they started by saying, oh, you're misrepresenting us. We didn't say that. That's a misrepresentation. Well, then when we proved it was not a misrepresentation and we showed that, hey, this material is sexually graphic, they said, oh, well, you're exaggerating. Okay, we did show that material, but you're making a bigger deal out of it than it really is. And then finally it became you're discriminating. So it started with you're misrepresenting. Then it evolved into you're exaggerating. Then it went to you're discriminating. Watch for that same trend. You'll see it even in 2023. And this is what I've said all along. One social movement opens the door for the next. The sexual freedom movement of the 1960s opened up the door for the gay rights movement. The gay rights movement opened up the door for the transgender movement in the 80s and 90s. And the current sexual atmosphere, the social acceptance of so many sexual variations, it's absolutely opening up the door for what they are now politely calling minor attracted people. Minor attracted persons rather than pedophilia. And that's also the way you do it. Change the language in reference to it and you make it more palatable to people. Watch in the coming year and you will see voices that are currently pro-LGBTQ will be joined by other voices that advocate for minor attracted persons. Do people who support LGBTQ support pedophilia? No, by and large, they do not. Most lesbians, gays, and transgenders are abhorred at the idea of sex between adults and children. But the movement they are currently espousing will be used by people who espouse pedophilia to advance their movement as well. Which leaves us with the challenge as we're looking to the trends that we're going to be seeing in 2023. It's a challenge about reform. First, we need to be reformed ourselves. As the church, we need to look in our own eyes, remove the plank so we can see clearly, examine ourselves. We need reformation within the church. There is an unacceptably high level of both doctrinal error and moral error within the current body of Christ. And this we have to address with honesty. We have to repent. We have to have our own moral reformation. We must be reformed. Then we must teach reform in our own churches and to our own children. We must teach what we are learning and experiencing ourselves. We have to take more authority over our home environments so that we're not allowing the world to make a case to our kids. We want to make the case to our kids first. And finally, we need to display reform. We need to be able to say prophetically to the culture, this works. We hold to traditional biblical values of faith, family, gender, sexuality, and justice. This is what it looks like. Are you interested? Well, Jesus said a city that's set on a hill can't be hidden. So what are we saying? When we are reformed, we teach reform, and we display reform. Are we saying we're going to now be like cancel culture and force that on everyone? No, we're not going to force, we're going to invite. I hope more than ever in 2023, we will first live reform out, and then we will say very boldly and even prophetically, whosoever will may come. Well, if you haven't yet subscribed to this podcast, I wish you would. Won't you hit that button, subscribe? Let me know you did. I'd like to thank you personally for that. If you've not yet read my book, which this podcast is based on, it's available through Amazon.com, called Christians in a Cancel Culture. That's written to equip you to be able to dialogue intelligently and biblically on key social issues like homosexuality, transgender, abortion, racial justice, and progressive Christianity. You can get that through Amazon.com. And finally, if you've not yet partnered with us in this work, won't you consider making a gift to Cloudfire Ministries so we can go on providing free content? Just go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving. That'll show you how you can partner with us in this ministry. Well, we're here every Friday, Christians in a Cancel Culture. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Meanwhile, let's you and I keep in mind the job description for anyone who says, I want to be a servant of the Lord. Well, here's how it goes. Paul laid it out to Timothy, 2 Timothy 2:24-25. The servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle to all, apt to teach, patient, in meekness instructing those who oppose themselves, if perhaps God will grant them repentance according to the knowledge of the truth. Let's keep that in mind, okay? When it comes to the truth, it's not just where you stand. It's also how you stand. Good seeing you. God bless.